I'm Lynn Roppolo. I'm one of the emergency medicine ultrasound faculty at John Peter Smith in Fort Worth, Texas. And I'm very delighted to be moderating our first session of probing the literature of the academic year. And for those of you who are new to this is a monthly series that we do once a month, and they kind of alternate just to try to accommodate as many people as we can in all your busy schedules, but some of them are Tuesday, some of them are Thursday. If you're not included in our distribution list, please let us know because we'd like to include you. And but for if you're just interested in ultrasound, this is this amazing opportunity to just be updated on the literature, to connect with other people. We also have a session afterward that we go over at what we call a research methods consult. And if you have any studies that you have, or maybe you're looking for collaborators, or you want some advice on your methodology, that's a great opportunity to just kind of connect with people and get some good advice. We have, normally what we do is we have a guest speaker, if you will, that is live, who is usually one of the authors of an ultrasound research paper, who comes on and talks about their study. And then the second component is usually like a second article, and we break out into groups, and there's a moderator, and then we discuss a particular article and then come back together and kind of discuss that article. And then the third part is usually the methods section. So it's just a really wonderful opportunity, and I'm delighted to be part of it. I'm relatively new to it. We have four, and one of them unfortunately may not be here because he's in a foreign country and he's trying to find a cell zone. So it's for those of you who saw the email and a list of amazing panelists. Dr. Shakui, he may not be here, but I'm going to actually put in the chat, because if I went over and introduced appropriately our line of awesome panelists, I think it would take up our entire session. So I'll be putting that in the chat. That just kind of has their bio and also has their email address if you want to reach out to them. They're friends of mine and people I've known for a while. What they have in common is they have extensive experience in research and ultrasound research. They've all been funded, they're well published, and they're just amazing individuals. So right now we have Dr. Frances Russell, who's here, and she is from Indiana University in the top left corner of your screen. And then we have Dr. Mike Gottlieb, who is in the bottom left, and he's from Rush University. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Adhikari, who is here from University of Arizona. And then he might come on later on, but Dr. Shokui, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name, I apologize, but he's from Mass General. So he'll hopefully hop on when he gets a cell zone, or unfortunately might miss this altogether. So the way this is going to go is we are going to do some rapid fire questions. I have a lot of questions lined up. We don't necessarily need to go through them, but I'll just kind of start and have them kind of go around and briefly introduce themselves, just to give you some highlights of their background and how they kind of got to where they are, because they're all incredibly successful. And so we'll start there, but this is sort of informal also. If you have any questions you want to put in the chat, this is for you. We want to make sure that we have information, we provide you with some pearls and some pitfalls that are meaningful for you, that can help you in your research, which is the focus of today's topic. So anyway, so we'll start with ladies first. Frances, do you want to just maybe just give just a kind of brief overview of yourself, kind of what your interest is, and just some what you're doing, your role, and how you got to where you are today? Because I know you've had some amazing mentors and some opportunities.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here today. It's always fun to talk about ultrasound research. I am Frances Russell, and I'm at the Indiana University. My current role there is I am the Ultrasound Research Director for our ultrasound division. And my research interests include heart failure as well as medical education research. And I started doing research pretty much in undergrad, but didn't really get into it until I completed fellowship. And that's mainly because the fellowship I was at, which was Cook County and Rush, which was a combined program, had a lot built into the fellowship curriculum for doing research. So we went to Embers, which is a research course through ACEP. I had John Balitz and Karen Cosby as mentors. Mike Gottlieb was an intern getting really into research. And so it was a bunch of people who were interested in research, doing research projects. And so by surrounding myself in that environment, I got pretty into research myself.
I was on mute. Thank you, Frances. Mike, do you want to mind giving a little bit of an overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm at Rush right now. I'm the vice chair of research. I'm also the division director. And I had a little bit of a different pathway to get there. And so I went into residency very much anti-research. I was very confident that whatever I wanted to do was going to involve teaching and doing procedures and being an clinician, but it was going to avoid research. I felt very, very steadfast in that fact that I was not going to do research. And one of the things I went in with was this conceptualization that research is only one version of sitting in a wet lab or really sitting there in front of a computer all alone, typing endlessly. And I had this conceptualization because I hadn't done research before then of what it might be. And then I actually started doing it. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. I learned that it was a team sport and you have a bunch of people that are working together as Francis had mentioned, that you have a bunch of people that are coming in with ideas and galvanizing together and talking through projects, and that you get to come up with creative ideas and study them and see what works, what doesn't. I actually really enjoyed it. And what I learned from this really is to put your foot in the water, trial it out, and find your passion. I think if my first project from research had been a forced on project where I didn't really want to do it, I don't know that I would have the same drive as getting to go in and say, I want to study this concept, and having that thing that was my question, my idea, and really bringing that together and having amazing mentors and collaborators who helped me to build my skill sets and evolve from there. And so one thing I think that really contributed to that was just finding your passion and finding the people with passion around you that will help support you.
Awesome. Very, very good point. We all come from very different backgrounds, and your reason for doing research can be, maybe somebody's making you do it, or maybe you really, really want to do it. But hopefully whatever you do, because you're putting your precious time and effort into this, that it's meaningful for you and you get something out of it. And you'll find that you get more out of it than you ever imagined, or at least for most people. So Srikar, you mind giving a brief overview?
Sure. So like Lynn mentioned, I'm at University of Arizona, section chief for ultrasound, and also oversee the fellowship and a few other roles. I have done fellowship almost now 2 decades ago, I think, with Mike Gottlieb. So I really didn't have any, I was also trained to cook. I didn't have any real research interest at the point, but I was really fortunate to work with Mike. So Mike, as you all know, is a prolific researcher in the field. So his mentorship really helped me to develop that interest. And I really like the grind of research, study design, implementation, whatnot, all that stuff. So after I finished my fellowship, my one and only goal was to get NIH funding. So, and I did a master's in clinical research, and I've been fortunate to publish a few manuscripts since then, and got NIH funding and DoD funding.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought up your extra training. Wow, a master's in clinical research, which is, like way more about research than I do. That's why your chapter for Mike's book is so incredible. So why don't we start with that? Because when people go into research, and there's people here that have done research, so I don't mean to kind of belittle the experience, but there's a people representative from all sorts of experiences. So how do you get more training? What do you recommend? We're hoping that people can get out of this just to kind of like some pearls on how to, what's the best course, or what are some of the resources? And maybe since you brought up your master's in clinical research, and I've noticed I do this other thing with SAEM on these research webinars, and it seems like there's a lot of people that are getting their master's in clinical research or some other sort of area related to what we're doing here. And it just, is it worth it? Would you recommend that for somebody that wants to really take this to the next level?
It's a good question. It all depends on your personal goals, I think, because there are a lot more platforms and resources than ever before to learn. And in fact, we met at Ember's Lynn way back. So I think Ember's course itself, our ARM course itself, they're all great. And I think they'll give you a foundation. I think that's probably good enough to do research. But if you want to take it one step further and you want to get funded and so on, I think having some structured training like masters, I think it's not primarily training. You build a lot of relationships and mentors and outside of EM. And that was very beneficial for me because my mentors were like dean of nursing school. So they had no mercy. Like they would tear my proposals apart. So I think I really benefited having that mentorship. So I think it depends on the personal goals, like how far you want to take your research. If it is just publications of manuscripts or you want to get funded, I think that's what decides, in terms of training, how much you need. But I think there's robust training with Embers and other courses they're offering these days. So not necessarily you have to pursue a master's.
Sure, I'm sure it was a lot of work. Just real briefly, can you just describe, because I've noticed that there's kind of about three different kinds of master's degrees. And when people are searching, if they did want to pursue a master's, are there like a few that you would recommend for emergency medicine, ultrasound research?
So right now, I mean, I don't know if there are just three. There's so many out
There
there.
are a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot more than three, I think. So I did master's in clinical translation research. That's primarily focused on, learning some basics of the research, but taking it onto the imaging side. But now there's an extra layer, right? So we're doing a lot of AI. So now if I have to do all over, what I would do is I would look into masters in innovation programs and masters in medical device development in addition to the research. So I would concentrate more on those components, I think, at this point. So, but I guarantee you there are a lot more now than three. But if you already have some background on biostatistics and epidemiology and some of the outcome-based research, I would hone in on what you're interested in, like I said, like if I had to do all over, I would probably do something with innovation.
Interesting. That's good to know. Hey, Mike, so how did you learn everything you know? I mean, I know there's a lot, it's multifactorial, but did you have any extra training?
So I'm going to kind of take a different side of that piece from Srikar, because I think there's a lot of value in the training piece of it. And I'm sure Francis can speak to some of this as well from the different programs. But I also think that just similar to medicine, right? We don't go to medical school and go out and practice and expect that we're going to know this. There is a on-the-job training. And so I would encourage that whatever project you're on, you figure out who's the most knowledgeable person in the room, get them on your project to have them show you what they can do. So parallels of this, maybe it's study design. So the first time you do study design, there's a lot of value in that. But as Srikar was alluding to, it wasn't just attending the course, it was the mentorship and the person who was willing to do that friendly and maybe not so friendly fire to go through the proposal and say, here's the issues. And so I think we, number one, need to have people that are on our teams that can show us the things we don't know. I do this almost every time I do a new study design. I grab a methodologist who knows the study design and that I don't know. And I have them not only help me make sure I'm doing a good job with the research, but actually teach me specifically, this is how you do it. These are the pearls, these are the pitfalls, here's the areas you can be more robust at. I would encourage that anytime you're on a project, use this not only to get the ultimate, knowledge out there on the publication, the research, but also to learn this style. And so, whether it be statistics, if you have a statistician on your project and you're offering them authorship and you're not learning from them, I think that's a huge missed opportunity for us. Just simply saying, let me just sit down and understand how you did this. Can you walk me through how to do this? They were doing the work anyways. It's a huge opportunity for us to learn how to do these methods that often seem above our heads until we learn how to do them. That is sitting right there on our project team. And so I highly encourage that we capitalize on that to get the on-the-job piece of it as well.
That's such a good point. And there's so many resources just everywhere, because you're not going to learn completely. Sometimes the statisticians, they just speak another language. So I'll just go and, try to look up some of the things that came up in our conversations. Hey, Francis, anything to add to what they said or what you felt that was really helpful for you? Because you took Embers. Maybe you can talk about that. You took Embers? Or
I did do Embers. It was part of my fellowship, and I thought Embers was great. It's basically an introduction to doing clinical research. And so it goes through everything from methodology to designing your study to writing your grant. And so you go for a week, you learn all of these things from different experts in emergency medicine, and then you come back about 6 months later with your full grant written and you present your grant. And so I pretty much learned almost kind of what Mike described, like on the job, where I had great mentorship with people like Jeffrey Klein, who I had already done Embers. And I also had a research boot camp that was offered internally at IU. But then having mentors who were successful, and one thing we'll get into, but having a mentoring panel is really important. So I had multiple mentors with our level funding who were able to give me perspectives on research and just like career development. And not necessarily, neither of them were ultrasound faculty per se. One was a toxicologist, and obviously Klein was studying pulmonary embolisms, but also interested in cardiac function and using ultrasound. So definitely both were advocates for ultrasound, which was helpful. But one thing one of my mentors mentioned, which is important to think about, especially when starting a career, is do you want to do big R or little r research? So big R is something what I think Srikar was kind of getting at with doing some specialized training, applying for NIH funding, and whether that's a K grant, which I think is a great route if you know you want to do big R research. Big R research is somewhat difficult within the field of ultrasound because it tends to be disease specific. So meaning, for example, for myself, I would have to go and apply for funding within the NHLBI, for example. So studying heart or cardiovascular disease, you're competing against other people who may be studying things within the NHLBI. And so it becomes less about ultrasound, but still ultrasound can be a component of that research. And with that, there's a lot that goes into that, but a K grant is a great way to have the time, have the resources that you need, because to do research, you really do need a lot of time. So it protects you down to 75%. So you're only working 25% clinical, you have 75% to do the research that you need to, but the K also includes a training component. And so, for example, Felipe Turan just got a K grant, and one of his elements that he's looking at is implementation sciences. So learning about that, and the K grant is allowing him to learn that, because a lot of what we do in ultrasound and using it clinically is implementation. And so that's a great way if you want to do big R research. If you want to do little r, and what I mean by that is you are kind of studying what you want to study. Maybe you're not going for grant funding or a big federal grant, but something small. Maybe you're applying for a smaller internal grant or a foundational grant like SAEMF, for example. And so both are research, but both have different pathways in the training that you need to be successful.
Thank you, Frances. So that was a lot of information, very helpful information. I thought, because I think we probably have a diverse group of people. Some of you want to be big researchers, and if you're gonna, get those big grants, you have to find eventually your little area of interest and just build upon it, because you usually have to have a successful study or a smaller study or something to be able to apply for these, so they know, what they're investing in. But I just want to bring it back to just some basic stuff first, because all of you are very successful. And so if you can just comment on the mentorship, because if you don't have mentorship, I mean, there's so much to know about research, and to have a successful publishable study, if we could just briefly talk about how you, like, what you would recommend for people to find a mentor. And then also, like, you are mentoring a lot of people in research. What are you looking for, and what do you expect from them? So, Mike, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So mentorship is key. I'll start with that. It is a foundational part of research. Whether you are, fully funded, tenured professor, or starting out, you have mentors forever. This just ends up being a valuable experience regardless. And as Frances kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, is that there's different forms of mentors. There's often kind of a mentorship board of directors or mentorship team. They're going to bring different elements. So you may have someone that is a career mentor. You may have someone that is a, research specific mentor. Like I have mentors who, will help push me on very small niche areas. And I have ones that are just overall career trajectory. And they have different skill sets. You can't expect one person to be able to cover all the areas. So it's very normal to have different mentors. You may have someone that's just kind of your life mentor that's going to tell you, hey, Mike, you're doing too much stuff. You need to layer it back. You need the people that are going to be able to kind of give you that outside lens of where you're at. So I would say in general, mentorship is highly valuable, and you're going to seek out a kind of diverse group who are going to add different lenses. As far as finding your mentor for this, it's a little bit trial and error. The way I like to think about it is if you're growing a garden. So you start with a garden and you sprinkle a bunch of seeds in the ground. Those are all the kind of mentor things you put in there, and some seeds take and some don't, and that's okay. And so as it goes forward, some of the plants will grow, and those are the mentorship relationships that will flourish and evolve. And some of them, will not be the right fit, and that's okay too. And as you go forward, you start to evolve, and you start to build these mentorship relationships. And then as you go forward, as you continue to grow, at some point you have to prune it back, and that's okay too. As you go through, some people that were mentors early in your career may no longer need to be primary core mentors and may just be collaborators in that aspect. And some people will continue to be forward, and that's okay to kind of prune it back too. You find the manageable amount that lets you to grow, lets you evolve as a researcher, as a person, and whatever number you need is the right number. It may be 3, it may be 15. It's going to vary a little bit based on what your needs are and where you are in your career, but it's almost always more than one. And so that's kind of my overarching take on mentorship. That I'm sure Srikar and Francis can lay on as well. The other aspect with regards to what I look for my mentees. And maybe this may parallel the way you look for a mentor, is you want someone that has the time to do so. You want a mentor who has the time to devote to you, is not trying to juggle like 15,000 other things, that actually can devote to you and your growth. And I want a mentee who has the time and the capacity to contribute similar to that relationship. That's going to, if we say we're going to work on something, there's a project or an area of growth I want them to work on, I expect they're going to work on that so that when we meet again, we can debrief and talk about that and evolve. So it's kind of a reciprocal expectation of time commitment to that. And if the timing isn't right, that's okay. It's saying, hey, this so-and-so is going on, and I'd like to, reach back at so-and-so time and reconnect on this. But I think you're going to expect that time and commitment, because if it's not bi-directional, then one side's going to feel slighted and that relationship will dissolve. And that's a huge missed opportunity for our own growth.
Thank you, Mike. Anything to add, Srikar, to that?
Yeah, actually, Mike articulated really well. Not a whole lot to add, but I would just say this: the mentorship is a big part of your success. I do not underestimate that. So, and it's critical to find a non-focused mentor, and because they have a different perspective, and also the ones who actually are very honest with you about your proposals and about your success and whatnot. And the last thing, like Mike alluded to, they should be vested in your success. That means you should be able to pick up phone and call them anytime you want, barring some limitations, but you should be able to contact them without any hesitation, I meant. So I really emphasize that mentorship is something, if you are a budding researcher, you should seek out.
Thank you, Srikar. Anything to add, Francis? Francis actually got Jeff Klein from the very beginning.
Yeah, I lucked into my mentorship. I had Dan Rusiniak, who's a well-known toxicologist, and then Jeffrey Klein, and as well as other mentors just within, like John Balitz and Karen Cosby, who were my fellowship directors, and now Rob Ferry, who's my division director. And so having a mentor is crucial. I could not have done anything without the mentorship that I've had. So I've been really lucky in that regard. I think one thing that is important, and Mike already said that, is they have to have the time, and you have to both put in the time. And something that, mentors are going to be busy. They're your mentors for a reason. They're probably successful in a field or in something. And so having a recurring meeting on the calendar, whether you meet or not, is going to be helpful. So say like every 2 weeks, we're meeting at this time. If you don't have anything to show them or to talk about, or vice versa, you can cancel the meeting, but at least you know it's there and recurring. I tried to find a female mentor at IU, and I went through many different people. I was totally unsuccessful because they were all way too busy. And so keep that in mind when you are finding a mentor.
Because they were co-managing the kids.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's all very good points. And just, I think I like your recurring meeting because the time can flip away. And, you're like, oh, what happened to that study? Oh, wow, look at, we haven't talked or communicated for 3 months sort of thing. And, I think with these mentors, I mean, I'm sure, if you impress your mentor and your mentor is this very accomplished person, they're going to want to really mentor you and even include you in some amazing work. So let's
and I will say, Lynn,
oh, yeah.
one of my pet peeves in being a mentor is missed deadlines. And I understand things come up, but if you have a grant coming up or you have a paper that you're writing and you have set a mutual deadline, those deadlines need to be honored. And so I think if you're meeting with a mentor, you guys need to set expectations in advance and make sure you set a timeline.
Definitely. I tell people that if you're going to do, especially with research, because everything just takes so long and there's so many things that you just can't control for, getting certain approvals. And then there's also things that you just don't expect. So let's, I just want to talk about just topics. Like what would you recommend, just some pros and pitfalls of just like kind of finding a topic to do research on? Because all of you have kind of narrowed your focus a little bit. And so, especially like ultrasound research, and even if you have some like recommendations, because I know we have some fellows here that are looking for projects. We have fellowship directors that are trying to get their fellows projects, and it just takes time to kind of like land on something. And then by the time you get it off the ground, sometimes it's like very late in the academic year and they don't finish it. So Srikar, do you mind taking this and just kind of talking about just what are you going to research and kind of how to get to a place where you can actually be effective and productive and get it done?
Yeah, sure. So there are two ways to look at it, and Francis already alluded to a little bit about this. So if you want to get funded, if you make your point-of-care ultrasound as your focus of your research, I think it's very unlikely you're going to get funded. You have to pick a disease of some sort. We'll go even with Felipe's example. And I have known Felipe for years, right from his fellowship years. And we both talked about, so he picked the cardiac arrest, right? That's a disease he picked. Of course, he had this interest in TE, but he wasn't pitching TE to NHLBI. He was pitching cardiac arrest research, right? So that's how he got funded, right? So you would have to pick a disease if you want to go that direction and see how ultrasound would make a difference in terms of changing the outcomes. But if it comes to like publications, I would say even Mike Gottlieb would agree with this. 2000s, early 2000s, anything you could probably publish. Some niche application of point-of-care ultrasound, easy to publish. And Mike Gottlieb is one of the editors as well. He knows things have gotten much difficult to publish these days, right? So you would have to kind of pick a topic which is meaningful, which adds something to the literature, existing literature, something which changes the outcomes. And having said that, there's a lot of opportunity in the medical education side right now. So because of the new technology, and then the last item I want to say is if you want to go the direction of technology, again, which I chose to go at this point, if you want to go with the handheld ultrasounds, AI, I think that's an opportunity there. You just need to have a good infrastructure to develop that kind of research.
Great. Mike, anything to add with that?
So that was a really nice summary, I think, of a lot of different ways you can kind of approach into that. One of the ways that, I've approached this as well, and this is taking the lens of as someone who does both big R and little R research. I realize most people are going to do, there's a higher proportion of building little R research. And so the way I approach this is basically with two pieces: open mindset and find the gap. And what I mean by that is when you're sitting there on a shift, when you're reading the literature, channel like your inner, you may hear my 2-year-old in the background right now as she's kind of, in half nap state. And it's always like a question, right? Like kids ask questions all the time. They're like, well, why? But why? But why? And our residents do this pretty well too. They're like, but why are we doing this? And then as we get further along, we ask fewer why questions, or when we think about them, we move on. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity for us to actually probe into but wait, the evidence we thought was really good is not as good as we thought. It wasn't, particularly as in 2024. And I think the first thing is when we started to probe back on that, we identified there's actually some gaps in terms of what we expected, we thought we knew, and was actually there in the literature. That provides a great opportunity to study that. It may be a matter of delving in and realizing there's gaps in how we've studied this. It may be a matter of how we implement it, speaking to, to the idea of implementation science and how we can talk about all we want about how great ultrasound is, but then we go to the community, it's not being used. That's a huge need in how we actually implement it well. So the first thing is to ask the whys, open your mind and say, what are the gaps? And maybe reading the literature and going through the limitations section saying, oh, cool, they didn't study this. Maybe I could study this. But then you have to follow by actually knowing what the real gaps are. And so things that may sound great in theory, and I'll put on my editor's hat as someone who edits for quite a few journals, frequently ideas that sounded novel, when you look through the literature, are actually extremely well studied. And so once you come with an idea, you say, oh, this is really novel, look through the literature, see what's been done before. So first, you don't spend a bunch of time on a project that has a strong evidentiary base, and then figure out what the gaps are. Oftentimes in limitations, they say, we studied it here, we didn't apply it to here. We study this in predominantly adult populations. We have no data in pediatrics. We study this in the ED environment. We have no data in pre-hospital environment. Figure out where the gaps are, and then you can find that there's an area to start with. And when you go through that, use this to figure out where your passion is. Trial it out. Figure out the things you like from this. Learn from this experience. And then that will help you, if you aren't going straight into a big R pathway, develop the skill set, develop the track record. So then if you want to go after, big R grant-funded research, to say, I have X number of publications, I built these skill sets, and it then helps you kind of funnel that forward. And if you're more focused on kind of, not grant-funded, but other terms of research, it also gives you a skill set to be able to do it with a lot more time, and then you can mentor others and carry a field forward. So in summary, approach with an open mindset, just like a kid, and try to figure out the why, and then probe the literature, figure out where the gaps are and what hasn't been studied so you can address that.
Thank you, Mike. Very good, very great points. Frances, anything else to say? Very thorough explanation.
Yeah, I think Mike said this previously, but really you need to research something that interests you. And so while you're training, you may not have the opportunity to do that. And so you may be a resident or a student or a fellow, and you're at a program where it's like, hey, we have these projects ongoing. We need your help with these projects. We don't have time to mentor you through a completely brand new project. But that is also an opportunity to learn how to do research. I'll give you an example. When I came to IU, I was studying right ventricular function and point-of-care ultrasound with that. And I was doing that because Jeff Klein was interested in that. It ended up not really being an interest of mine. I was able to secure a relatively large internal grant at IU, and I gave it back because I was not interested in the study. And so as sad as that was, I knew I was not passionate about it, and I would hate to go to work every day working on something that I really wasn't that interested in. So now I'm back studying the left side of the heart, which people care about. So anyways, the other thing I will say is you need to find your niche. And whether you're doing little r or big R, this is important, because if you're just studying every random thing that you think about, you're really not developing yourself into an expert. And to do research, you really want to be an expert. You want to be up to date on what literature is being presented. So something I tell anyone getting into research is meet with a librarian, have them set up an inbox for you where they can, every week I get an email with, these are the new ultrasound papers that have been published in the field. So I can stay up to date with what's being published. And then I can also send this to my mentees who may be studying nerve blocks or whatever. I'm like, hey, this is being published, or this abstract is getting submitted. You need to be aware of this and know who these people are that are studying. You need to read, again, what methods are they using? What are the limitations? And then you can plan your study based on, again, what Mike had said, are the limitations out there, because there's limitations with every single study, and there's room for us to grow. And to do high quality research, it really should be in one or two areas that you consider your niche.
Very good points. Yeah, if you have a perfect study, very few limitations, look at the back, and it's funded by a drug company or something. So anyway, just something to think about. But these are all very, very good points. So we have about 20 more minutes. So I wanted to focus on 3 things that might be helpful to everybody. One of them is just, let's talk about grant funding and running a research program, and any recommendations that you have at getting a fellow through their project sort of thing. So Mike, I had kind of talked to you about research funding and just my background, I've done almost 99% of them were unfunded studies because I was trying to work with residents and small studies that were doable during the residency. So they weren't funded, and I did apply and got my first real grant, and Francis was my mentor, and I also got some mentorship from Mike as well. So Mike, talk about where you start, because you guys throw up like all these like different abbreviations, and you don't start there. Like, so for somebody that has never applied for a grant before, what are the starting points, and what are kind of just briefly just most common big grants that they could work toward, just kind of a manageable list, if you will, and kind of how you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest pearls that Srikar kind of mentioned very early on is that grants are looking for disease processes. They aren't looking for technology, with maybe the exception of AI. So in general, you're looking for a disease process. So figure out if you have a question, how do you align with disease process? And maybe I want to study, the right ventricular function, but the disease process is going to be pulmonary embolism or RVMI. I want to study TEE, but the disease process is cardiac arrest. I want to study, each one, you're figuring out the disease process. And the reason we're doing this is not just for the sake of disease processes, it's that the funding institutions, and the vast majority of them, learn disease processes. NHLBI, which is the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, is focused on heart, lung, and blood. They are not focused on ultrasound. It's not in their title. And so by the nature of it, they are looking predominantly at proposals from cardiologists and hematologists and pulmonologists who are on disease processes. And when we come in there, we're saying, like, I like ultrasound, they're like, well, that's cute, but that's not what we're looking for. They want to see something that aligns with what they're used to seeing. And so how do we take what we have, this project we want, and we see the disease process, and try to find the way to mix them? You don't have to awkwardly shoehorn it in where it doesn't align, but you also can't go in there saying, I want to do it this way and expect to get funded. It's going to be, how do you align it with what they're looking for? What's the grant's overall, goal? And they'll say it often in these, what we call an RFA, which is a request for, application. In these things, they'll say, like, this is what we're looking for. And you have to figure out, how do you sell this to align with their goal? And the second thing is, grants very much are just like papers. Once you learn the rules, they become easier. If you think back to when you were a student and you presented your first patient on an ED rotation, and you started talking about the patient, and very quickly you're like, and I think they have this, and I was doing my physical exam, and I was thinking I could get your points on them. So anyway, so their family has, and it's all over the place, right? And then we learn kind of our, the language that we expect to. We learn how to talk to our consultants. We learn the expectations of language. And grants are the same thing. There's, significance, there's an innovation, there's the research plan, there's a specific aims page, and there's very clear things of what they're looking for. In fact, they actually publish it on the NIH page and almost tell you line by line what you need to do. But if we don't follow the rules, they're going to say, well, if you can't follow the rules of this, how can I trust you to follow the rules of the to do an adequate enough study? And they're very risk averse in general. And so it's not to say right or wrong. It is extra work to learn that, but once you learn it, it becomes easier. But if you want to get funded, it's align with the disease process, tell them why this aligns with what they care about, and then learn the rules of the game so you can explain it in language they expect to hear.
Thank you, Mike. Great points. Francis, can you talk about just kind of the early researcher and some opportunities that they have to, what are the reachable grants that they could apply for? You mentioned Embers taking that course. You do go through the motions and apply for a grant. And I think there is an award at the very end of the course, like somebody gets a grant. But what about some other opportunities? And you had kind of mentioned some other, just because there's a lot of grants. So I don't know if you could just mention a few of them.
Yeah, so finding a grant is rather tough, but when you're starting out, I'd recommend either looking at your institution or foundation. So institution meaning like your university, foundation meaning like ACEP, SAEM as examples. And so they both have smaller grants that you can apply for to get pilot data. So maybe you have a study that you want to do, and you can collect a small sample of patients to say, yeah, I think this could work, kind of working through some of the feasibility. But that allows you to collect some preliminary data that you could then use to apply for a larger grant. In addition, it helps you to build that track record of, I have now published with my co-investigators, which is something important that when you apply for larger funding, they're going to want to know who's on your study team and do you have a track record of funding. It's going to be very important, as well as where are you doing the research? Do they have the resources for you to be successful with this grant? Through SAEM, there's also ARMED and ARMED Med Ed, which are both research courses that are offered, and AUS offers a scholarship for those. It's an application that you have to fill out, and Petra can probably talk about that more than I can, but I know there are scholarships if you don't have the money to pay for going to those courses. And then oftentimes there's some sort of like CTSI or clinical translational type research program that exists at larger universities where they also have internal grants there and can give you grant resources. So this year I applied for an ARC grant. And so I just wanted every resource available. So I was able to get a mentor at my university who does mentoring for NIH. He's a benchtop researcher, but he's been funded for like 20 years and does this on a national level. And so doing a grant writing group. So we met every other Friday for 3 hours. There was 4 of us, and we went through each person's proposal and went line by line and made sure it made sense. And these other people were like pediatrics, geriatrics, they weren't ultrasound, they weren't EM. And we go through each other's grants and we pretty much rip them apart to make them better. So that was a huge help. The other thing I did was I hired a grant writer, which actually was like the best use of my money I could use. And she was not very expensive. I'm happy to share her information in the chat. And she will do everything from helping you write your grant to just reviewing it. And those things combined, I was able to do about 100 different drafts on my grant to make it that much better. And so it's currently submitted. Hopefully it'll get funded, but we'll see. So there's a ton of resources out there. And if you're newer to research, you can talk to your research director, your vice chair of research. There's plenty of people within your department that could help you.
Awesome. Good luck with that, by the way. You're going to get this grant.
Thank you.
It's a lot of work. So Srikar, let's go to the next level. And you have extramural funding from the NIH and the DoD. And could you kind of take us through, like, how did you get there? And some of these titles like K grant and, just things that people like throw around, and some people on this webinar may not know.
Sure. So K grant is definitely a training grant. And I think if you're a junior faculty, just finished fellowship, it does make sense if you're going to pursue that path. K grant is the best way to go. There are internal K grants within the institution. That's what I started with. So that took away, like I was down to from 11 shifts to 4 shifts. So that actually helped me to write the grants and so on. So it did help. So that's number one. Second is, I was going to say, if you want to take this path, you're in for a long haul. You have to handle rejections really well, because pay lines are down to 8% in NIH. So it's not that easy to get funding. I think as long as you're prepared for that, I think you said something I wanted to highlight, that anything you do, like all the publications you have, they are generating a resume for you, and also they are going to be helping you to develop that preliminary data for you. So it's all helpful. Any little grant, I got AIM grant, ACEP grant, and all this stuff, they're building blocks for you to get there. And one last thing I want to say is, if you think that you're very good and you can get the grant funding by yourself, totally wrong. This is what I thought about myself 10 years ago. You have to have smart people around you, a team around you, collaborators around you, with recurring meetings, Like every week I talk to our team and see what's going on. And there are a lot of funding, search engines you can find in the university, like something like Grant Forward, Proposal Central. There are a lot of things out there to find the funding agencies. So I think as long as you realize that you're in the long haul and you find a good team, I think your success rate is much higher.
It definitely, it takes a village.
Absolutely. No, there is no doubt about that, Lynn.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, you want to have your end in mind. Like, where do you want to be in 5 years and 10 years, and what do you need to do that, and not waste your time on things that may not actually have any meaning for you on your CV to get promoted or whatever it is that you want to do. So let's talk in the last 10 minutes about your ultrasound research programs. So any pearls and pitfalls or just anything that you could recommend, like getting your faculty on board, doing clinical ultrasound research in the emergency department. Because both of you have done an extensive amount of research. Mike, do you mind starting and just talking about how you do it at your program and anything you could recommend for our group here?
Yeah, absolutely. So building on Srikar's point, research is a team sport. It is all about having teams and really multiple teams. So our division publishes probably about 90 to 100 papers a year. And it's not individuals publishing 90 to 100 papers, it's teams and teams upon teams. So in any given point, multiple of us are spread across multiple different teams that may or may not involve the same people. And so if we're all relying on all of us to try to do this, there's no way we could possibly do that many papers. There's no way we could do even a quarter of that many projects if it was just a small group of us. It's building out your broader teams, and it does a couple of things. So in the first point, it distributes effort. So it's not on one person's shoulders, it's multiple people, and that means you get to learn from multiple people, you get to expand your knowledge, you expand your connections, you expand your ideas, you see different lenses we may not see. So the first one is building that team out there. The other one is it helps us to evolve past ourselves, because no one of us are going to do this forever. Most of the teams I work on, my goal is that I become extraneous and I'm no longer a part of them and they run on their own. And I think that really should be all of our goals, is that we evolve our field, is that it shouldn't be relying upon any of us. It should be us building out skill sets for ourselves, passing them to others, and continuing to expand the ability, the expertise across our specialty. That's where we need to be going. And so really the teams is key. Without teams, if you're doing this on your own, you will at the very least become exhausted, potentially burnt out, but you also won't get exposed to new ideas in a way, and that joy and that fun that comes out of a whole team galvanizing of our project. It's one of the things that brings my passion, and keeps me doing research, is that piece right there.
Awesome. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself, but Frances is still here. She is just driving right now, so she has her screen off. Srikar, I'm sure you have lots to say.
Yeah, I'll just take quickly a couple of things I'll add. So I think the number one thing is you need to understand your infrastructure and your patient population. What is feasible in that given institution. So I think that's the best way to start your research. And also, if you are the leader, when you're recruiting, you want to recruit people who have common goals. And that's the key. And then, you have a lot of people who can help you with the research, like your residents, and you can create programs and medical students who can rotate with you, and you can offer them authorship and so on. I think they're more than excited to contribute to a research program. So there are different ways to look at it, but definitely those are actually my priorities when I moved here in Tucson. Have a good team, and build the infrastructure, and then have a leadership support your program to a certain degree. So
that's such a good point. That definitely pick your team wisely. I mean, just to have somebody that is really not contributing, that's not responding to emails, or who has a long history of that kind of work ethic. So your team definitely is important. Frances, I know you're driving, but do you have anything else to add about your ultrasound research program? Any additional?
I would say it helps to have your division director on board. This way you can kind of set up incentives to help get people to do research. I mean, some people just want to teach and be educators, and that's fine, but everyone needs to be contributing some sort of research for promotion and tenure. And so there is some small incentive with that. But something else we've done is just kind of studying what we're already doing. And so a lot of the researchers in your division aren't going to be big R researchers. And so a little R project could be just studying. For one example we had was we were going to be training about 90 faculty in point of care ultrasound. And so publishing on our experience of training adult learners, for example, ultrasound. And there was really nothing in the literature when we started out with doing that. And so you're already probably doing a ton of teaching and training. And so finding ways to study that will help to kind of decrease the workload.
Definitely. Thank you for that. I'm just looking in the chat because we're almost out of time. There is a question somebody asked about opinions on AI for helping to write grants. So does anybody, I don't know if any of you do this. Do you want to?
I'll take that
Both of
question.
you nodding. Do you want to take that, Srikar?
Yeah, I'll take that question. So yeah, you could use it, but I think I would be very careful how you use it, because most of the funding agencies are actually asking you that question. Are you using LLMs? Did you use the LLM to write a grant? If so, what components of the grant is actually you have used, whether to develop actually the proposal, the idea, or methods, and so on. So they say that wouldn't affect the review, but I have a hard time believing that. So I would be careful. I stay away if it comes to writing grant. And Mike can speak to, as an editor for journals, are also asking these days about LLMs, who are using LLMs to write the grants. I am obviously pro about using LLMs for a lot of things in life, but I think you have to be careful when it comes to grant writing once they realize that your proposal is not authentic, and that's a problem right there. So.
Yeah, they might put a little bad taste in their mouth about you. Anything else to add about that, Mike or Francis?
Yeah, I agree with Srikar insofar as for the writing standpoint of it, there's a stigma against it. I also think that it's ultimately it's a computer that's doing algorithms. So it's going to be a high propensity to give you the exact same phrasing that is, similar to everyone else. Every sentence starts with leveraging X. And so there's certain things you can tell almost with experience of what's been written by AI. Now, I think the best way of using AI, instead of using it to write for you, is that you can use AI to identify the gaps you don't see. So you only have so many mentors and so much time. And having AI be my friendly fire of what is the cognitive gap in here? Or let's say I'm writing a submission to the IRB and I need to write at the 8th grade level. Please review this grant and identify any words that are above the 8th grade level. I think using it as a tool to identify your gaps. Please identify the gap in my thought process. Please identify what aspects of strobe, and you can copy it in there, I'm missing. That is an awesome use of AI because it'll help you find gaps. But I think if you're using it to write for you, it is risking, at the very least, perception of issues, if not potentially having issues.
Thank you. And Francis commented, don't do it. So I think we're out of time. So I just closing comments. And if you have any other questions, there's so much more we can be talking about. You have all of our email addresses, but just any last parting words. Srikar, why don't you go first, and then Mike, and then Francis, and then we'll end with that, and then go into the research methods.
Yeah, I just want to highlight one thing. My observation is you're after your fellowship, finishing fellowship, you want to do a lot of things. You want to do teach residents, fellows, and you want to run the program and a lot of other management things. So you need to decide how much research you want to do, because if you want to do everything great, I think you're going to have a stroke, which I think I had 3 or 4 of them. So I'm joking. But I'm just saying you need to realize that. So, but on the other hand, if you just take complete research path, there is a risk which comes with that. That means you're leaving all the focus of the very training you receive, you're keeping that aside. So just be mindful of that in terms of choosing that research path.
Great. Good point. Thank you. Mike?
So we've emphasized a lot of key things that I think throughout here, whether it be passion, team building, knowing the rules of the game. The one that Srikar alluded to a little bit that I'd like to just highlight out is persistence. Whether it's going after grants, whether it's writing, whether it's doing research in general, expect and be okay with failing and failing often. That's okay. It's part of the growth process, and that's normal. All of us, I can I don't even have enough pages on my computer to list the number of times I failed at a paper, a project, a grant. But I don't see them as failures. I see them as growth opportunities. I say, okay, so what did I learn from this? I got feedback from the grant reviewers. I'm now going to revise how I approach this one. I learned from this study that here are some institutional limitations, or here are some design limitations that I can carry to the next project. It's all about how we carry it forward. So kind of being okay with that, bouncing back if a journal rejects it, if a grant gets doesn't get funded, that's okay. That's normal. That's a healthy part of the process and how we learn from it. And just kind of taking a deep breath, stepping back, and then going right back into it is how we evolve, how we succeed, and how you do eventually get to whatever goal is your end goal.
Thank you. Very good points. There's so many good pointers that are really helpful. I'm learning, picking up some things too. Frances, you get the last word for this session.
Great. So one thing I want to mention is Lynn helped me put this website together, but we have a great website on AUS research resources, where we tried to put a bunch of ultrasound research resources in one place. And so if Lynn or Petra could put that in the chat would be great. And then I'll leave you with something Jeff Klein told me, which is you can impact care of a patient either locally or regionally by just teaching and taking care of the patients you're seeing, but you can impact care for patients on a global scale by doing research. And that's one of the things that really motivates me is we're doing this to help our patients, and you can help patients no matter where they are geographically. And it's hard, but it's really rewarding.
Definitely lots of benefits. Well, thank you all. I just wanted to thank our panelists. Really appreciate your time and just all your knowledge. Hope everybody here found it helpful. I put links to contact information and bios in the chat if you're interested. But thank you for attending. So we're just this will conclude this session. And if any of you have any questions and just kind of want to informally go over some of your research and just want a methods consult or whatever, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for joining us.